And what a dummy! Welcome back to the Fantasy Rugby Draft podcast. My name's Bruce Wilkinson. Thanks for downloading and listening. I'm flying solo again this week. Mossman has gone bush to a spiritual retreat, I understand, in honour of the great Keith Murdoch. So he won't be with us this week. We felt it was better to put something out as opposed to nothing, so you'll have to bear with us. Hopefully normal service will be resumed next week. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rug Draft. That's Fantasy Rug Draft. Or drop us a note at support@fantasyrugbydraft.com. We're going to look through last week's games, just look at the teams and look at some fantasy notes that are coming out for looking forward to Gameweek 8. So let's look at the Chiefs to start with. So DMak, again, crushing it, absolutely crushing it. Making quite a few mistakes, but luckily for fantasy, that actually is quite helpful. So every time he gets a charge down, he'll turn around and get 3 defenders beaten, or throws a pass, he has to clean it up. He beats another 3 defenders. Massive amounts of defenders beaten this week. Really, really impressive. Little question mark around when they are actually looking to do this All Blacks rest for DMak. I suspect it's probably in Africa, so it's not a couple of weeks away. The question probably on a lot of people's lips is who is it going to be instead of DMak. It looks like it might be trending towards DMak, but probably not a thing you have to worry too much about now. Suffice to say, the closer you get to that South African tour for the Chiefs, you might want to just start looking at carrying potentially DMak, or just monitoring who that might be. Looks like DMak at this stage. Charlie Ngatai came on, played 12 actually, which seemed a little bit against what he had been doing previously. So good to see him back fit, I guess, first of all. Alamano was pretty solid at 15, well, actually very, very good at 15. Obviously played Northland there for the Mitre 10 Cup. I think Wainui might be the one to miss out. I expect Ngatai for the game against the Blues this week. Ngatai probably shift back to 15, and they'll stick with Jonathan Faiuli at 12, and then Pulu and Alamano on the wings. So just be mindful. I mean, there is still a chance. Wainui is playing okay, so there is a chance that he still fills in, and there actually is a chance that he may go into the midfield as well. So don't cut him just yet. Wait till that Chiefs team, which is probably going to be named sometime tomorrow on Thursday. So I'm recording this Wednesday morning at 9 a.m, so before any of the team sheets come out, expecting the Hurricanes and the Sharks to be later on today. But we'll get to them in a bit. Big news for the Highlanders is, well, certainly for this game at least. Before I go into that, the Chiefs have been really, if you haven't noticed, Anton Leonard-Brown is putting up monster points this year. Last year was the one we were pumping and we thought it would happen. Maybe we're a year early on that. He just seems to be getting his hands free more often, and he's getting over that gain line as well. So very, very impressive for him, and it's good to have him out playing outside DMak as well. Seems to be proving a pretty good foil for him. Back to the Highlanders. So Sopoaga is the big injury. So a non-contact injury always looks bad, always sounds bad, and generally has a very bad outcome. But for this one, it didn't. It looked actually as though he may be back. He did tweet or grammed at some stage after the match and just said, look, seems to be okay. It's not as bad as we thought. However, if I was a Sopoaga owner, even though it's a bye this week, I would be picking up Fletcher Smith. Lack of fly halves in the player hub at the moment. People really are quite desperate in some of those stakes, but we'd probably just be picking up for insurance anyway. Ben Smith, just not a fantasy 15 at this stage. Great fullback, love him, but just not putting out the 15. And he's probably got a rest in him as well for the All Blacks coming up. Some coaches are open about that, some are less open. So I actually haven't heard fact from Steve Hansen that they actually have to have these rests. I think Chris Boyd might be the only player, maybe the Chiefs guys mentioned as well, Colin Cooper, but it's a bit sketchy, and it's a bit sketchy to say whether an injury counts as a bye, counts as a rest. It's also not sure whether you have to have 2 weeks on the bounce. I know Matt Duffy had one this week, so it'll be interesting to see where he kind of fits in. Quite why Matt Duffy is having an All Blacks rest, I'll never know, but that's neither here nor there. Highlanders on a bye, so we'll move on to the Hurricanes and the Rebels, which is quite an entertaining match. Purely looking at the week coming up, though, we've got the same headache of Ben Lam, Arso, Wes Houston and Savea. Savea actually played okay, certainly for fantasy points, which is probably what we're more interested in here. It's a little bit of a trend around when Savea plays in the derby matches, low, non-derby matches, decent. Whether he stays on the wing and see Ben Lam in there, it just depends on what they do with Wes Houston. He actually played 13 for a little bit of the game that he came on as well. And Arso switched to the wing. And Arso wasn't actually doing a hell of a lot at 13. It seemed a lot of the points were being scored around him up until that changed. So keep an eye on that. I don't think Proctor will be back this week. I think they'll probably manage him quite carefully, especially considering this next point, which is when exactly Boyd is going to bench the All Blacks. And I'm talking about the TJ Perenara, Bowden Barrett and Laumape. Those are the three guys. Geordie's had one week off at the start through injury, so I'm not entirely sure if that counts or not. But by the time you listen to this, actually, it's all going to be pretty fruitless because the team would have been named. But I'm not sure how much value Ehire West has compared to, say, Bowden Barrett, because I suspect a lot of suspecting going on. I suspect when Barrett does get injured, Bowden, that is, does get rested, that Geordie Barrett is probably going to be doing the kicking. So the Rebels, 2 weeks, so we didn't have a podcast last week due to Easter. Week before, really, really interesting tidbit from Natalie. Now, I don't know her last name, sorry, it's a Greek name, Yanonis or something. Apologies to Natalie, I didn't really pay too much attention to it, but it was a great stat that she pulled out during the game, which would have been really, really useful to have before the game, in that Jack Deprashini has been working very, very closely with Mick the Kick on goal kicking, and obviously he took over the goal kicking from Reece Hodge last week, and he's kicking well, and it looks like the Rebels are playing a little bit different than what other coaches and captains have been doing, and that they took a lot of points against the Hurricanes. Couldn't really build the scoreboard pressure that they were looking at, mainly because of that one try at the very end of the first half, which kind of broke their backs. But taking the 3, which makes Debrashini, who was a kind of fill-in bye-week replacement, he now comes into that kind of top kind of 10 fly half bracket, so certainly useful, probably even somewhere closer to the 5 through 10 mark than it is 10, and he'll have better games against easier opposition than potentially the best team in the competition at the Hurricanes at the moment. Worrying signs for Corabetti. 0 runs, I think it might have been in the first half, just not getting his hands on the ball at all. I don't know if there's any useful advice in there. They've got the bye this week. I'm not sure you can do any horse trading with him. He does have a name, but I'm not sure people are going to be looking at that, especially because he is a little bit of a punt coming in. Played well for the Wallabies, but very, very worrying signs, the amount of touches he is actually getting on the ball. Murphy was an interesting case. He bollocked his way through to the half time with 1,000 run meters. They said he came off with concussion, but I don't know. That seemed like it might have been a little bit of a nefarious one where he was just absolutely knackered, and they called it a concussion test so that he could come back on. Now, that's clearly very shady and against the rules / laws / morals of the game, so I'm not going to level that at him, but it just did look a bit suspicious that they came up with concussion. I didn't really see the hit that he got done with. Blues Sharks. I'm not entirely sure where to start with this one. The Dupree brothers just killing it, but let's start with the Blues. I won't get into the team overall, but horribly inconsistent. Defence optional. It's all about attitude defence, so there's something systemic there with the Blues, and I think they need to solve that pretty quickly. Let's just say that it's lucky Tana Umaga has a few mates at Sky when all these opinion shows that are on. Otherwise, there might be a few more harsh words spoken, I would have thought. Nanai considered himself a little bit unlucky in a game that had 1 million points in it. Came off injured, looked pretty bad. Keep an eye out for what time frame is. Blues are usually fairly good when they name their team around time frames around players, and Nanai, it did look kind of bad, so to keep an eye out for that. TJ Faiani came on, and he kind of came into 12, and then Rieko and Moala were kind of swapping around between wing and 13, and Moala ended up getting a lot of the points that potentially Nanai would have. I think they'll probably stick with that again. I think they'll probably go with Faiani to 12. I'm not sure they would have looked at that performance from the Blues and said, yep, that's the answer, putting Rieko at 12. It just screams of desperation, square peg, round hole type thing. He's more a 13, and to be honest, he's more a winger, to be honest, at this stage of his career. I would like to see Faiani at 12 and then either Rieko and on the wing. So keep an eye out for that team. Perofranchise, very, very, very good run. I'm not convinced he actually played all that well during the match. There's a lot of very aimless kicks and a bit of handling errors as well. Just didn't grab the game around the scruff of the neck like it needed to be. Got half his points in that one run, I would have thought as well. Jordan Trainer looked a little bit out of his depth. Maybe he's better for another performance under his belt, first real exposure to the lights. And Michael Collins just keeps on putting up points. Really, really solid again. Even in you'd expect it in this game because there's a lot of points. So a lot of points went round for absolutely everyone, except for, and let's get on to that. The Sharks outside back. So Kilwin Bosch did okay, mainly due probably half his points. I was trying to add them up. There's probably about 14 or 15 points came from that one break at the end where he scored the try. But aside from that, he's been fairly solid the last kind of, certainly the week before against the Brumbies, and then the Rebels he wasn't as good. And then this week he was pretty good again. It's just the wingers. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. Cozy just doesn't seem to be that player that goes looking for the ball. He's got some real talent, and Lord knows what's happening with Mpimpi. I don't know where he is, but he should be somewhere near there. Van Fake actually played quite well when he came on, so I wouldn't be surprised to see his name on the team sheet this week. But again, you're just playing roulette with those back three. I think Bosch is probably the one that's going to be starting, but at 15, well, certainly the one starting at 15, but just how you mix and match those other outsides, I'm not too sure. Bob Dupree, very, very impressive. Just looking at his goal kicking was just so accurate, but he was his all-round play as well. I mean, Sharks fans were calling for his head the week before. Now he's a Springbok contender. I think he's probably somewhere in between. But that probably has an impact on Bosch coming into 10, which I think a few folks were musing before the game. That didn't happen at all during this game. He looked really, really imperious, and it probably helped a lot to have Andre Esterhausen outside him as well. That was playing very, very well. Am's a good player. It's just trying to get those to the outside backs. We don't really need to talk about Jean-Luc Dupree. That's just a very Dolph Lundgren type performance from him. Just amazing. Van der Vault looked pretty good. He seems to be the guy that's taking the kick off, so he gets 2 or 3 meters depending on how he gets, and there's always good for an offload there as well. Didn't rack up too many points, but it looks like he's going to be quite a focal point for the Sharks structures. So hopefully more to come. Maybe not in this next match though, because I think the Hurricanes might be the second best defense in the competition, I want to say. Anyway. Sort out that back three and keep an eye on that team that'll probably be named this afternoon as well. Akker van der Merwe pre-game got pulled, which is a little bit worrying. A little bit of a trend starting to appear as well with him, so not great. Brumbies Tahs, fair play to anyone who watched this. Izzy, 4 to 6 weeks out. That's a big blow for Folaus owners who are probably in a little bit of a hole anyway because he hasn't exactly been ripping up trees. He's been solid, but bad time as well against the Sunwolves coming up. Yeah, just devastating for Israel Folau owners and for Israel Folau. Newsom actually played quite well, so he's probably going to be a solid play against the Sunwolves. I say solid, pretty good play against the Sunwolves. Gordon coming back looked really good. Didn't really run as much as he usually does, didn't really snipe, but I wondered if just put that down to game plan and how it kind of unfolded. Maybe he's just getting a little bit of confidence under his belt as well. Tahs front row, whilst they didn't put up the big numbers that they have been, they're still the 5th in average points per game. So stick with those, especially this week against the Sunwolves. Hegarty at 15 is a good fill-in for fly half owners who have Debrashini as well. So look that way. So Brumbies, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, they're a tough watch at the moment. The Reds, I think, has the best defence in the comp, so probably look to continue. Pocock was pretty good first game out, 15 points, but puts him as if he keeps that up, number 4 average points per game. He got some great turnovers in there, so yeah, those were awarded well. A little bit of a question mark around Nasarani, not performing to expectations and not performing to what he can do as well. So a little bit of a concern there. Hopefully that kind of comes back around again and he starts carrying those balls in the channels that we're hoping for. I think they've got to sort out what's going on in that back three as well. Your head's there at the moment. I'm not sure Banks is the answer either. Certainly for a young kid, it seemed a strange decision benching him, trying to get his confidence up that way. Seemed a little bit counterintuitive, but yeah, keep an eye out to see whether Banks actually makes an impression, because Muirhead, I mean, looks okay, tries hard, just doesn't look like he's the long-term answer at 15 for Brumbies. I was going to play 4 and 4 with Mossman, brought to you by Manager Pro, where winning is everything. However, obviously he's not here, so I'll probably just read them out. And just a point around Manager Pro, we've dropped the price again to just $11. So get amongst it. It's really, really valuable, especially at this time of the season now when you start looking at average points per game and also form. So we look at players and how hot they are at the moment, and it makes it easier to look through your player hub and to see all your free agents and sort them by average points per game and form. Yeah, it's a cut above the rest, as well as things like the team naming. So we got the Lions team that were pushed to Manager Pro 8 hours before it was actually released on social. So that's a big fill-in for folks who had Rohan van Rensburg, Janse van Rensburg, and we'll get onto him in a little bit. But really useful for those guys who own that to start thinking of a plan B for him and to figure it out, especially because those two teams were named really, really late, being a Sunday night match or Sunday afternoon match in South Africa, overnight match in New Zealand. So 4 and form, number 1, no surprises, DMak. So he's the smallest person in the top 4, and the rest of them are filled out by absolute monsters. So Naiyaravoro, that's 2 really good performances from him, number 2. Salmaki, number 3. So they'll be not far away from going head to head. I'm not sure they'll be literally head to head, but they potentially could swap over and play against each other this week, so that'll be interesting to watch. Salmaki, and then Ben Lamb, obviously, with his 1,000-point performance last week. Really, really impressive. I can't see Ben Lamb getting benched just to kind of go back to the Hurricanes. I just don't see Ben Lamb being benched at the moment when he's in this type of form. I'm not particularly sure he's doing enough to be in that All Black equation, which a lot of scribes appear to be writing about, mainly because it's pretty competitive in that area. But we shall see. So that was 4 and Form, brought to you by Manager Pro. Go to www.fantasyrugbydraft.com/Manager Pro. Great features in there. Get amongst it. Right, Stormers Bulls. The Derby match did actually bring back the points for both teams in this match. It does look like that might be the way. The Bulls actually played quite well. Their forward pack was monstering. Some really good players in there stepping up as well. Obviously, the highlights was Adrian Strauss getting a hat-trick, and well done to the Bulls front row getting 11 points after Adrian Strauss picked up 15. Well played. They're on a bye this week, so if you are in a lead and you have a player left over in the Crusaders Jaguares matches on Sunday, players to look at might be Lud Diago, got dropped in quite a few, and also Marco Fad Starden has put 2 good performances in now, so keep an eye on that as well. Warwick Gallant looked really sluggish again, really sluggish. I would expect a little bit more from him at home. Travis Husmail pulled out last second, which is just so frustrating for managers. They went with Ben Kotzer and Russo as well. Jesse Creer was okay, not great, but okay in a team that didn't put up big points. It's probably enough for the Bulls at this stage. As I say, they're on a bye this week, so there's a couple of players you can look at to pick up, but I wouldn't go crazy for them. Stormers, interesting to see that SP Murray wasn't kicking, which is a change to philosophy from Fleck at the start of the season. So Damien Willemse was kicking, and probably quite rightfully so. I think I saw a stat on Twitter, and I can't remember, apologies, who put it out there, that he was kicking in the 90s and one of the highest percentage kickers so far in the tournament. But I think it probably makes sense to put him at them. Not a great performance from Willemse, but I think it was more symptomatic of the Stormers overall. Didn't put in a massive shift, and their forwards got a little bit overrun. Lades again, just not great. The next two games are probably not going to be that great either, but they do have a decent run, and apart from that, they missed the final, the Fantasy Rugby Draft final, but apart from that, he's got some decent games in him. I think most of his points again came from that one run that he did. So worrying sign for Lades, who was very, very impressive last year. I would still stick with SP and Lades though. It's just a matter of looking at the different games that they're up against and who they're playing. Damien Delendo looked better. He looks fitter. He made Gallant look really, really stupid. But he's putting out some points, and he's got that step outside break that he loves doing, which is what he was really known for in 2015. And he seems to have that outside break now, which is one of the deadly things about him when he did it in 2015. Copus Visa, I think a few people were looking at what he was going to be doing and what he was putting out. It looks like that one performance he did put out was a one-hit wonder, and he seems to get injured a lot. So this killed a lot of managers. I wouldn't be putting my trust in him for a while. Right, let's move on to the Lions. Probably the big name to look at, and it was more around the team naming, was Rohan, Janse, van Rensburg. Really, really interesting case here. We're not 100% sure which way it actually is the truth, but when Vorster was talking about where Rohan was before the match on Friday night, I think it might have been Saturday morning, they were talking about how it was great having the ability to rest and keep players fresh. So we kind of naturally assumed that that's what Suisse was doing. He was resting Van Rensburg, but as it turns out, there was an article from South Africa Rugby magazine recently, yesterday I think it might have been, or overnight, talking about how some of the players are coming back soon, and they listed Van Rensburg as a knee injury and potentially back this week, which is fabulous news to know 3 days after said missing of match. So a little bit of a confusing situation there. I guess you just need to take a look at keep an eye out for any more news from Swiss. It does look like it potentially was a knee injury. Ross Cronje, so they signed Nick Groom overnight with immediate effect. So they were a little bit worried about Ross Cronje's ribs. It looks like they're going to be a little bit more worried. This isn't a good sign for him. Clearly they've got long-term concerns over how bad that injury actually is. And for a contending team like the Lions, they know that they have to and a winning team or a win-now team, they need to replace quality with quality. So they've gone with Nick Groom and take him out of his Saints contract at the North. Combrink was quote-unquote in the mix. We had mid-April as the kind of line in the sand for him, and maybe even Skosan as well. But certainly Combrink was name-checked by Swiss in the article in South Africa Rugby Mag that he could be this week, and it may be 1 week too early for him. But they did mention him as well, so maybe look for him to be on the bench. Quite who he takes over from Mahuza and Tumbwe, not too sure. Tumbwe was paid actually pretty well this last week, and he looks pretty good. Just a bit raw, and needs to sort out his kickoffs. Warren Whiteley is the player that Swiss mentioned that's probably the most likely out of all of the injured guys to be close to being back this week. So if anyone's dropped them in their league, have a look in your player hub and grab him now because he's just on the horizon. Coetzee is fine. Andreas Coetzee is fine as long as butchered tries don't count against anything in Fantasy Rugby Draft, and they don't. Horrendous butchers against the Crusaders, maybe 2 or 3. Just, yeah, the man's got blinkers. And it shows in his defenders beaten. He's willing to put the ball up in the jumper and just not look at his outsides. Daimani looks to be PSB Mark 2. Not sure how long this will actually last with the Lions bye coming up, as well as Warren Whiteley on the horizon as well. So freak of nature, got the physical assets, very similar to PSB's physical assets, but quite how much game time he's going to get, I'm not too sure. If you've got space, if you've got an Elliot Dixon or someone like that sitting on your bench, not doing anything this week, it's worth the roll of the dice and seeing if they actually shift up Warren Whiteley and keep him at 6 or something like that as well, and keep Diami in the team. But yeah, likelihood that when Warren Whiteley comes back, it's probably not going to be a great output for him. Quagga Smith he's okay. He's 10-point average, which is not particularly good, but it's not particularly bad. It still puts him in the kind of top 15 loose forwards for the year. So in terms of average points per game, if you've got Pro again, you can see that really, really clearly. Just wasn't very good this week. Matt Todd was. Fair play to him. He played really, really well. The game didn't have a hell of a lot of point scorers in it, aside from Bridge, who probably, well, I'm not going to get into whether it was forward or not, but he had a couple of tries very close to being scored, but called back for forward passes. But he was busy. He pops up everywhere, and he seems to get quite a few run meters and defenders beaten. And he loves playing in South Africa as well. Him and Havili, although Havili again, he had one call back as well, but hopefully a little bit more from him this week. Looking at the Crusaders, so Goodhue came off injured. And Tamanavalu came into the centres for this particular match. Crotty went off quite early on. I think it might have been at halftime or just before halftime. But it sounds as though that was just because he'd been sick all week. He had the flu. So hopefully that's passed, and he is going to be playing this week against the Jaguares. And if it does, I think we might see him pop out one and Bateman come in there. That's certainly what they did last time when they were at home and they had an injury. They didn't start with Seta in the midfield. And to be honest, I'm not too sure what Seta's... he played better this week, but I think if you just look at what Matalei did when he came on, he's taking every chance, and I would be starting him on my right wing at the moment in the form that he is in. And I know he does give you a lot of boost off the bench and a lot of firepower off the bench, but when you can have that starting, running over marks and running over, I think it might have been Hooser, I can't remember what it was, for Jack Goodhue's try, very, very impressive. Mitch Hunt, just average. We mentioned it. He is really the classic bye-week injury fill-in. Can't get the ball off the square either. Samu's not on tour, but he should be back next week, I would have thought. That's looking at the time frame. So if you've got space on your bench and you're winning, and you don't need to have those players for the last match, maybe look ahead to the waiver wire. And so Samu is someone that I'd be looking at as well. Sanders may get his chance this week against over Bidwell Curtis, although Bidwell Curtis has been playing quite well. When Sanders plays, he does put out points, so one thing to keep an eye on there. Again, if you've got that Elliot Dixon sitting there, it's probably worth a little bit of a roll of the dice to see if Sanders might actually get that spot. So the only probably 3 other teams that we really need to talk about are the 3 bye teams, Sunwolves, Reds and Jaguares. Sunwolves, the only really news that I think we've seen is Fukuoka might be back. Interesting to see how they fit in 2 11s into that team. Fukuoka played a lot on the left wing last year, but I understand he's fairly versatile as well. Whether he comes straight back in, I'm not too sure. The Reds, I think the lads on the Fantasy XV Draft podcast were talking that Preezs may not be too far away as well. So, yeah, that's a pretty good sneaky if you've got them as well. Interesting to see who he actually takes over, because Dalgoody, has played very, very well, not just from a fantasy perspective, but also just from a rugby perspective as well. He looks really good, and they've got Chris F. Satir there as well. So need to check that and who actually gets dropped. But maybe roll the dice a little bit on Preezs. Again, it's only if you've got that spare bench spot. I don't expect him to be named this week in the team. The Jaguares, De La Fuente's on the horizon. Whether he comes in for Orlando or not too sure. Paul Tate mentioned overnight on Twitter that Buffelli is doubtful. So if you are just plugging and playing in Buffelli, you might want to just make a plan B, just to check to see whether or not you do have backup there. It'll be Delguy. Maybe Moyano might actually start because he's not too far away. So maybe he comes onto the wing, and that's what we've kind of been hoping for. But yeah, just keep an eye out for that Buffelli news and make a plan B. Juan Martin Hernandez retired overnight. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but it's from immediate effect from All Football. So big loss. Certainly just from a team perspective. I'm sure he'll hang around the Jaguares. Not a big loss from a playing perspective. I think his best playing days were behind him, but he does add a little bit of experience in that Jaguares team. Certainly likes to, let's just say, not have the greatest discipline. Matera and Decio were huge the week before last. So if you've forgotten that, just keep in memory of that, because they were immense against the Lions. Now, they are playing the Crusaders, so there is a little asterisk there. But if you do see those guys, they're probably worth, they're low-end loose forward number 2 this week. But I think they'll be worth playing all right. Decio certainly seems to be carrying the ball at 8 quite frequently. That's probably as much from the review as we've got. So you can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rugby Draft. That's Fantasy Rugby Draft. Or drop us a note at support@fantasyrugbydraft.com. We'll be doing our Start Bench show again on Friday night at 6:30. So send through your hashtag StartBench on Facebook or on Twitter. That's how we're trawling through all of the questions. We'll put something up on Thursday night you can hang your hat on. But yeah, 6:30 Friday night, New Zealand time. Send through your Start Bench questions. And I think actually just to dovetail that, Robbie Barone picked up the Manager Pro monthly pass by correctly predicting that DMak was the top Gameweek scorer for Gameweek 6. So we'll be doing that again for Gameweek 8. So if you want to get a chance for that, tune on in. Thanks for downloading and listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson. Help you repeat it.
What a bust here by Christian Cullen. Plenty of support, and what a